Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invite to Wild Pig Summit 2024. I am currently in Holland, but happy to be presenting virtually through a recording. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. We have a very active Facebook page linked below. We have lots of stuff on Twitter, my link below, and of course, my phone number and email are there. So reach out if you want to see some of the more details. I have exactly 20 minutes, I'm told, so I'm going to keep it brief and hit some of the key highlights of some of the work we've done over the last 14, now going on 15 years, looking at wild pigs here in Canada. And the topic I've been assigned is to talk about predicting movements and establishing lineages of invasive wild pigs in Canada. So here we go. One of the things that we find out real quick when you talk about mapping pigs, it gets a lot of people really excited, and there is no way to do it that doesn't to get some people upset. And certainly it turns out that calling them super pigs also gets people very, very upset. So one of the things I did prior to this meeting, thinking about alternatives to wild pigs, I turned to ChatGTP. ChatGTP came up with their top 10 suggestions as alternatives to super pigs, and you can choose your favorite out of the list that maybe we can use going forward. I like Porkopolis Plague, Tusker Terrors, Havoc Hogs is not bad. Borzilla Horde maybe a little over the top, but there's our that's what computer generated technology comes up with for a list. You may have all others yourself. So what have we done over the last 14 years in my group at the University of Saskatchewan? We've been studying wild pigs in Canada since I started at the U of S in 2010. And since then, we've done more than 1,000 media stories on wild pigs, various stories around Canada, and certainly the US has picked up, but they have some very genuine and real and justified concerns about where things are at with wild pigs in Canada. And so they've been picking up a lot as well in the last number of years. We have a very active Facebook page, as I said. We're called the Canadian Wild Pig Research Project. We have more than 18,000 likes, and we get many tens of thousands of follows and looks at our content. From you can go on there and look at capture video from us using helicopter to capture pigs, to you can download multiple different types of maps. Anything we produce is publicly and broadly available, and try to get it out in as near real time as we can. And sometimes I put up trial examples of things, and people comment and suggest and improve, and so really appreciate all the feedback. And so we've really been arguably the primary source of information for wild pigs for a long time now. In terms of data, we've collected a database of more than 66,000 confirmed wild pig occurrences in Canada using about 10 different sources. We have GPS collars. We have lots and lots of interviews that Ruth Asham and others have done. We picked up public reports for sure, but we also have used our own trail cameras, and we've collected a tremendous amount of data from many thousands of photos from other folks running trail cameras for various reasons. Media reports that are, and again, all this is the key word there is confirmed, because we do follow up, and I've had a whole pile of students working for me in various ways that have followed up with folks. A lot of the stuff that we have is also based on ongoing relationships. We've had people we've known now for well over a decade that have been looking at pigs and following pigs, and some have been running trail cameras nonstop for the last decade or more. And so a good chunk of our information does come from these relationships, people we know and trust that are sending us photos or saying, hey, we just went to check cattle and we spotted a group of 10 pigs in the back 40 or whatever that is, with detailed locations and information. But everything gets checked and confirmed. Though, to be perfectly clear, and this is a major point of discussion, but when you get public occurrence data, at some level you have to, or you have to make some decisions, and those decisions vary. And we've been working at this and on other species for a long time, looking at this question, and it is a key challenge. How do you deal with public occurrence data? Part of it is that we compare it with other data and triangulate, and there's a whole bunch of methods we can look at to evaluate, and certainly look, does it realistic? Is it, up in Nunavut versus is it somewhere in Saskatchewan where we're not surprised at all? We're the only one so far I'm aware of that makes national maps of wild pigs, and so Ruth Asham's PhD work was really arguably the single most important and the most defensible piece of work that we've produced, from her PhD work, showing not only the current distribution of wild pigs at the time, but also baseline maps across the way from starting through. And I'll show you some examples. I've updated that since, and so we published in 2019 and 2023. We published a whole bunch of different research on reproduction, conflicts with native wildlife, issues with invasive species, how these pigs move, how they select habitat, and how they disperse. And I'll touch a little bit on that today. We completed 12 student projects. And then the next big thing we're working on, and have been for a while, but are expanding, is genetic analysis through recent grant from Alberta Pork. So they've reinvigorated that work, and we're moving that forward with big enthusiasm. So as many people I think will know, domestic wild boar farms started in the 80s, and into the 90s we had releases of people cutting fence and letting them go on purpose. We had escapes, and we still have. This is an ongoing problem. A lot of provinces don't have a great handle on how many wild boar farms or where they are. And there are still some, I had summer students go to one farm not that long ago, and everything bigger than about 40 pounds ran through the fence and met them at their vehicle when they opened the door. So there are still ongoing challenges with that for sure. And of course, them getting over a fence, under a fence, or through a fence is such a challenge, keeping them inside, regardless of quality of fencing. But certainly it has been a challenge. And again, while a big part of the problem has solved itself in the fact that the number of wild boar farms is quite low because for economic reasons. There's still a lot of farms in a lot of provinces, and they are still getting out in various ways, shapes, and forms. And so that's still a 2024 problem. This is a map showing all of the census data that we've compiled. We've done quite a lot of work with census data looking at wild boar farms. We've also done other surveys. We've done a lot of work showing wild boar and various forms of pigs for sale on Kijiji, which has been, and there still are. Just last time I looked, there was some wild boar type animals still cash and carry sale on Kijiji for sale online. And so this really reflects that in 2001 we had a peak of 500 farms, 32,000 animals on the hoof, and that peaked in 2001, and we did see a substantive crash. And so this area has declined, but this is the area I call where you're not allowed to be surprised if you see wild pigs in this area, because we have had, and even in the Yukon currently, there's several wild boar farms, and they're still debating the notion of what to do about it, whether they're going to continue to allow it or not. And so these census areas are big, and may cover, not the entire range of wild boar farms, but we do have the point data, which I won't get into today, showing the individual points of where wild boar farms were and where they are. And in Root's analysis, it wasn't habitat that was the best predictor of where wild pigs were. It was really where the current and past farms were by far the best predictor of where the free-ranging wild pigs are. But again, that's no surprise given that that is the only source, right? We didn't get them from the US, and they didn't fall out of the sky. They came from wild boar farms. And the data we've collected, Ruth did a tremendous number of, she put in something like 65,000 kilometers on her car, driving around, interviewing people and mapping where wild pigs are, and collected all the data I talked about for the database, which we continue to update and collect data. We get about 3.5 to 4 new occurrences every single day, 7 days a week, 365. Get lots and lots of data. And again, a big chunk of that is from long-term collaborators and from our existing, a whole range of data methods. But public reportings play a part of that, probably about a third overall. We've captured and collared animals, so we're the only ones in Canada so far that have done a major collaring effort. I think there's been in Alberta, I think they got 2 last year, and that's amazing. But in terms of large scale collaring and long-term movements and tracking data, so far we're the only ones in Canada that have done that yet. And so we have a really nice database of movement patterns of wild pigs from these GPS satellite collars, collecting a location every 2 hours and sending it to us 2 to 3 times a day. So a tremendous data set there. And all of the animals we collared, we went back in afterwards and removed the collared animal and everything in the group with it, and any other groups we could find. And so the agreements we had with landowners at that time in the area were, yes, we're going to leave collars on for a year, but we're going to leave the area with a lot less pigs than we started with, which is what is often referred to as a Judas pig technique. And so we've applied this Judas technique and found that on a one-time only basis, for every animal you collar, you remove 9. If you left those colors out longer, that would increase dramatically. But very, very successful use of Judas pigs, and again, the only ones to do that so far in Canada, but lots of promise there. So capture and handling animals, we marked them, but also when we recaptured them, collected lots and lots of samples. We weighed them. So we're doing a step paper right now on weights of pigs. We've used punches out of the ears to look at genetics, and I'll speak to that in a little bit. Lots of movement data, and just learned a tremendous amount about pigs. And for example, one just quick example is that the pigs that we monitored in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, they have larger home ranges than any other pigs on the planet by quite a large margin. Pig home ranges in Europe, some of them are 1 to 3 square kilometers, whereas our pigs are in the 200 to 400 square kilometer home range size. So massive movements of these pigs, and far bigger than anything we've seen. We've done lots of projects on moose and elk and deer and other species, and nothing moves like these wild pigs. They form huge sounders. We estimate this sounder, if you could see all of them, but back of envelope estimate, this weighs about the same as an F-150 pickup truck. And you can see the nice razor sharp tusks on the front of the lead animal there. So, I see I left Montana. I was doing some other work, but so not picking on Montana anyway. It just happened to be in the map I was making, but I was doing some of the updated maps for this. And so this is what Canada looked like before 1980. We had, to our knowledge, no free-ranging wild pig occurrences. There were, that said, I mean, my grandpa talks about, domestic pigs taking off and surviving in the wild for sometimes years, but nothing established anywhere that we were aware of that survived. Through up to 2000, we had a small number of occurrences, mostly on the prairies, one in BC, one in Ontario. And then up to 2010, we saw a few more occurring, especially actually quite a number across the western half of the provinces. And then by 2020, we started to see quite a large number of occurrences, especially on the prairie provinces. Now, we did have, Ontario has had quite a number in the last few years. BC has had a small number. As far as we can tell, it is important to state that there's not really a whole lot of evidence of any established populations of reproducing pigs outside of the prairie provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And so that's where 99.3% of our entire database of occurrences, that 66,000 points that we've collected from 1980 to, but last night I got two emails saying more pigs. And so it is very much a prairie problem for the most part, but of course, one of the things we know about these pigs is that one pregnant sow could turn into 100 animals in the course of 2 to 3 years pretty rapidly. So we certainly can't ignore any dots on the map, but these are occurrences, and we don't always know the fate. In fact, in a lot of cases, we have no idea what the fates of these animals are. So these are occurrences. And when we come to mapping, there's a number of different ways you can plot data. For the purposes of today and the time restraints, I'm just mostly focusing on the point data that we have, but we often plot it by watersheds, and certainly you can take that and this is all the data combined. But as we'll see in some of the further analysis, at some point we probably start to say, well, data from the 80s and 90s is probably less relevant to our current concerns, and look at more recent data, which makes sense. But beauty of the analysis and the way we can take it into a computer program like GIS or R statistics is that we can make maps showing different years, different concentrations, and we can analyze these data many, many ways. As you'll see on our Facebook page, we have lots and lots of different kinds of maps and different backgrounds associated with. We can associate the pigs with other species at risk, other native wildlife. We can different habitats. One map on our Facebook page just shows gold as the background, where we have agricultural cropland production and pigs associated with that. Because if you overlay crop production with where these pigs are in this map, you'll see a tremendous overlap for two reasons. One is that, of course, that's where the farms were. In those crop producing regions in farmland, wild boar farms were, I think without really very few exceptions, are pretty much associated with large scale agricultural production. but also that then there's lots of habitat, and they do rely on agriculture tremendously. When we say corn is king, we mean it. Pigs will take all sorts of risks and do all kinds of crazy things to get into agricultural crops. Now, this is the most recent 2024 map. We're seeing lots and lots of points, and really concerningly, the last 4 years, we've probably seen a little over half of all the points we've collected were within the last 4 years. So things have really exploded. This is the exponential curve that we learned about when we were in COVID, and how things go from being very relatively low to extremely high really, really quickly. These things are producing 6 young per litter, multiple litters per year, and so in some ways we really shouldn't be surprised. This is exactly what pigs do. This is what they did in Australia, the US, numerous islands around the world, and many, many different areas. And so this is a global challenge, and Canada is experiencing, in a lot of ways, exactly what, and unfortunately, exactly what I predicted when we started working on this in 2010, 2011, unfortunately. And to look at another way in terms of watersheds, this is an updated map for the prairie provinces without the boundaries, but of course, our pigs don't respect these boundaries. In the prairies, the red is where we've had wild pig occurrences, and the blue where we have confirmed reproduction. Because again, just because a pig walked through one field doesn't necessarily cause us major concern. But when we start to see multiple occurrences and in fact reproduction, that's strong compelling evidence that we have something going on here. We have developed a predictive model, which is available. We haven't had any uptake or interest in it so far, but we'd be keen to see this thing get used more. This uses collar data to predict where pigs are going to go. And so in this particular version, the brown areas are the hot spots of connectivity where they're most likely to move. And we've numbered the 4 key areas, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that are these big, well-connected spots that we're most concerned, and then the blue areas are where we're least concerned. And so you could actually use this to make predictions and highlight areas and prioritize efforts based on where these pigs are likely to go. And of course, not only spreading across provinces, but spreading between countries is particular concern. And we have lots of pigs that are not that far from the Canada-US border. I've highlighted here in purple some of those hot spots and major concerns again. So you can see a number in Saskatchewan across the Montana border, and that Manitoba, North Dakota border is particularly concerning as well. But big spots in Minnesota where pigs could set up shop and become a real nuisance there as well. So that map is useful in that regard. This shows the probabilities and likelihood of movements between provinces, between states, and across the Canada-US border. We've looked at also looking at what we call strongholds. So these are all the watersheds with pigs in the last 12. So we've made 12 years. There is no magic number to say 10 or 12 or 8 or 20 is right. And so after looking at the data, I decided on 12. But if someone says, Ryan, make a map with 14, I can do that in 2.5 seconds, or I could do 8, or even could do the last 4 or 5 years, which is again, where we've had most of the data anyway. And so when we drop off the 80s and 90s, these maps don't change hardly at all anyway, because the overwhelming majority have been recent. So you see the brighter red where we have lots more pigs than less pigs. And so we have some what I call strongholds of pigs, where if we say, okay, show me the last 12 years, all the watersheds in Canada that have had more than 80 occurrences in our database. You see one northwest of Edmonton. I'm pointing with my finger, and you can't see that, of course, but there's one northwest of Edmonton. There's one towards the Battlefords in Saskatchewan, and then one big, this is the hotspot for wild pigs in Canada. And certainly this area in here has more wild pigs here than the rest of Canada combined. So this is a massive hotspot. And then, of course, where you guys are right now in that Brandon area are sitting right in that hot zone in southwestern Manitoba, which historically was mostly Spruce Woods Provincial Park, but we've seen that, and this has been for most of the hotspots, we've seen them expand considerably. And so what we see is a huge numbers of pigs relatively in these strongholds. And as we'll see with the collar data and with the overall distribution data, we're seeing shotgun blasts of pigs emanating from these hotspots. And so I often talk about this 2-pig problem, where you have pigs concentrated here, but then, as you saw from the other maps, dots showing up everywhere, and you can't ignore either. Obviously, the hotspot is a critical concern, and a source for a lot of pigs. And, I often refer to this area in Saskatchewan as a wild pig factory because it is. And certainly during the time we've been talking, there's been at least one litter of wild pigs born in this area here, and several born in the Western prairies just during the now 18 minutes I've been talking. So a major concern there, and certainly identifies some of the areas where I think targeted efforts can be really particularly useful. And then these are with more than 250 occurrences, so there really are essentially three major strongholds in the three prairie provinces to be worried about. And then lastly, I just want to show, and I won't be able to dig into this, but density of wild pig farms relative to wild boar farms where wild pigs are. So we've been doing a lot of work looking at overlap between domestic wild pigs and free-ranging wild pig or domestic pigs, pardon me, and the pink pigs in a barn and wild pigs running around outside. And so we've looked at multiple scales, and so we've done a lot of work looking at spatial overlap at watershed levels for the prairie provinces, but we've also looked at fine scale where GPS collars are visiting domestic pig farms. And to be frank, that's pretty alarming stuff. The number of pigs coming on to these wild boar farms and visiting on a regular basis is probably one of the more alarming things I've seen in our work so far in terms of potential for disease transmission. So there is a lot of work to be done to deal with interactions. And of course, at this level, we can't talk about interactions. I just call, shared watersheds. They may share the same watershed, but not come within 15 kilometers of each other. But that does highlight where the more riskier spots are. And certainly the collar data highlight that there are individual farms that have, well, they've needed immediate action for quite some time now. These models have been out for a few years. So some big work to do there. And then lastly, we've looked at genetics of wild boar. So we've done a little bit of preliminary work, but now just through this very recent funding from Alberta Pork, we are moving forward on this with gusto. And so what we found so far is we have 48 samples that are fully genotyped from animals in Canada. The animals we looked at so far have somewhere between 56 and 93% wild European wild boar. Importantly, that's European. Any notions people have talked about Russian wild boar and Polish, and if you go on the websites of some of these penned hunt farms, they talk about, well, you can choose a Russian wild boar, a Polish wild boar, or some sort of mongrel, if you will. But in fact, we haven't seen anything that isn't European wild boar origin. A whole range of other breeds, which I can share if you're interested, but we found all sorts of other breeds of pigs mixed in there, some on purpose in Canada and some that probably almost certainly arrived already with some some of those older English breeds that in some ways look an awful lot like wild boars. So far, we only have samples from the prairie provinces. We would dearly, dearly love to get more samples from anywhere, but certainly outside of the prairie provinces. So looking for anybody in this group that happens to have ears or access to ears. We just need little punches, much, much smaller than a dime through the ear to get a genetic sample. And that's all we need to look at this project. So if anybody's willing and able, that would be fantastic. So feel free to reach out if you're interested in this project, and certainly reach out if you have any kind of samples we can beg, borrow, or steal. So we're getting more samples from wild boar farms and free-ranging wild pigs, hopefully more provinces. We're going to look at population genetics to look at the overall spread, and also look at relatedness between wild boar farms and wild pigs. And what they do in the U.S. is that if a pig is shot somewhere, say it showed up in Montana, they can take a sample from that pig and say, well, it very likely came on a truck from Texas, or it very likely ran from this state over here or wherever. And so getting insight to the genetics has a lot of implications for understanding the broader population, but very practical implications for individual situations. So right now it's, people say, oh, that thing looks like a wild boar, it looks like a domestic pig. Well, frankly, we really have no idea until we dig into the actual genetics. And looking at that, at the relationship between, farm A right here with wild boar and wild pig B and C running around near it, are those animals directly related, or are they from somewhere else? And so I think we're going to get a whole bunch of new insights into that. Thank you so much for the invite, and also thanks. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has funded the overwhelming majority of this work so far, and Alberta Pork is funding the big next step. So much thanks to them, but to the other groups that helped to get this started. But certainly this would be about a 1-minute presentation if it wasn't for the USDA. The USDA has funded the overwhelming majority of wild pig research in Canada. And I hope to see that change at some point, but certainly up till now, the USDA has been the biggest funder by far. And we're incredibly grateful for all of the work, the collaring and Ruth's work and the graduate students. And none of that would have happened without USDA support and help. And most of the papers we're publishing are co-authored with USDA scientists. So great collaborations there. And thanks so much. And feel free to reach out and let me know if you have ears, if you have questions, if you have occurrence data, you want to talk about maps. I'm certainly here to help. Thanks so much.